hand over to the president of REDLAC, Zenka Pistolich. Over to you, Zenka.
Thank you very much, James, and welcome everyone to our last session of this virtual Congress. As most of you who might have been in the early presentation that we had saw in this amazing review that we had of the 10 years of lessons of conservation trust funds, a lot of the work that conservation trust funds are doing is evolving towards greater engagement with private sector and promoting blue and green economy, not only to promote better livelihoods, but also to seek new sources of funding and to engage private sector and others in this process. So this session that we're going to have now is absolutely important, fundamental for the work that we do as conservation trust funds, and not only for those of us who are working in the conservation trust fund field, but also for the organizations that we work with in the field, smaller grassroots organizations as well. So I'm very happy and honored to introduce the moderator for this session, Maria Jose Gonzalez, who is the Executive Director of the Mesoamerican Reef Fund since 2005. The Mesoamerican Reef Fund is a private environmental fund that drives regional funding and partnerships for conservation, restoration, and sustainable use of the Mesoamerican Reef, shared by Mexico, Belize, Guatemala, and Honduras. She has contributed to the capitalization of $27.7 million in endowment and mobilizing over $26 million of project funding to the region. Maria Jose also participated in the design and the establishment of REDLAC and has served twice in its executive committee. So Maria Jose, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Zenka. Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all. It has been wonderful to attend this REDLAC and Cafe Congress, virtual Congress. It has been an amazing learning experience. Really, the presentations have been fantastic. As Melissa pointed out during the first day, I too miss the in-person sessions and having the opportunity to meet up with old and new friends, but this has been an amazing second option. So congratulations to the organizers, that have been great. I'm very happy to moderate this panel on building resilience through the promotion of the blue and green economy. And as Zenka mentioned, the previous sessions and Paquita's ending to the presentation of the 10-year review is really, really set the stage for what we will be discussing in this panel. So promoting blue and green economy is essential for improving livelihoods through sustainable development, while also providing numerous benefits to the conservation of biodiversity. Now, climate change exerts pressure on the conditions of the ecosystems and affects the well-being of the communities. The good news is that we are learning more and more that low carbon and climate resilient investments can actually deliver higher economic returns than investments in traditional activities such as fossil fuels or infrastructure, for example. And the experts on today's panel will help us to better understand the ways in which communities and organizations can adapt to overcome the challenges posed by climate change and increase their resilience and increase their livelihood resilience through the blue and green economies. So we will hear from 4 panelists today, and I will share who they are, and I will introduce them briefly to you. So our first speaker will be Thomas Verna. He is the Regional Technical Coordinator of Marine and Coastal Resilience for Eastern and Southern Africa for IUCN. He has a mixed background in both conservation and finance and has been spearheading the development of several first-of-its-kind innovative financial mechanisms. He is constantly looking for new ways of generating sustainable streams of revenue for both nature and the people that depend on it. Our second speaker will be Charles Karangwa, who is the Regional Technical Coordinator for Forests, Landscapes, and Livelihoods for Eastern and Southern Africa as well, for IUCN. He also leads sustainable finance initiatives for IUCN in that same region. He has more than 17 years of experience in landscape management, conservation enterprise development, conservation and climate finance, markets and value chain research, and rural livelihoods. Gillian Marcel is the managing member for Resilience Capital, As a senior leader in economic development and international business, she has a proven track record in attracting investment to emerging markets. She is very active in the impact investment space, where her contributions and perspectives on diversity, inclusion, accountability, and alignment with the SDGs are becoming influential. And last of all, we will hear from Angelique Beaufourneau, who is the CEO of the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust. Angelique has worked in different countries in the Caribbean, Pacific, and Indian Ocean on a wide range of projects relating to sustainable fisheries, sustainable management of marine biodiversity within and beyond national jurisdictions, and climate change, in particular, climate adaptation and climate finance. So after these very brief presentations, Thomas, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. And well, good evening or good morning. I'm not entirely sure. I think this is, one of those examples where there's people from everywhere around the world. So obviously, different time zones. Buenas tardes, buenos días a todos, bonjour, bonsoir. C'est vraiment un plaisir d'être ici. And I think I'm going to do my presentation in English so that it's sort of, better for most of the people. So I'm just going to try to share my screen, and please, Maria Jose, if you can just let me know if it works, and then I'll start right away.
Yes, working.
All right, wonderful. All right, so again, it's such a pleasure to be here and to have the honor in a way to actually close those 3 days session, which I think have been very, very constructive, very interesting. So I'm Thomas Bernard. I'm the Regional Technical Coordinator for Coastal and Marine Conservation for IUCN in Eastern and Southern Africa. And today I'm going to talk about the blue economy and sort of I've sort of named my presentation towards a blue future, in particular for the Western Indian Ocean region, which is one of the key regions where we are focusing on in this sort of in Eastern and Southern Africa when it comes in particular to blue economy. And I've sort of sub-named the presentation Going Beyond Sustainability. And I think I'm going to elaborate a bit more on this, but first and foremost, of course, I think there is, it's important to make sure that we're all on the same page, And here, the point that I want to make is, climate change is happening. And it's not something that, we know that is going to happen in the future, even in the near future. It's already happening. It has been happening already for the past few years, decades, in fact. But now, today, we can see it. It's very concrete. We can feel it. There is lives at risk, and there is actually lives and people who have lost their life. And it's pretty. When we look at recent events such as the wildfires, for instance, in the Amazonia or in Australia, for instance, or the droughts in our region, as a matter of fact, in Kenya, or cyclones like in the Western Indian Ocean region, just to illustrate maybe a little bit. So this is a picture that has been taken earlier this year, during the last year during the very, very hard drought that we went through in Kenya. So obviously here you can see directly the impact of this type of weather event. And obviously, the point is that, with climate change and biodiversity loss, this is only gonna increase. This is a picture that has been taken in Mozambique, very close to one of our project sites in Beira, as a matter of fact, in Mozambique, just after the cyclone Idai went through. So as you can see, it's pretty obvious that this is happening. Now the question is, we do have this very small window of opportunity, and we're sort of a crossroad where either we make the right choice and eventually we can avoid the worst, impacts of climate change and eventually again here biodiversity loss, because as a matter of fact, those two crises are intricately linked. Or we don't make the right choice and we don't sort of, gear up and double down, on what needs to be done. And eventually sort of the second half of this picture shows, a doom and gloom type of situation. But as I said, we still have this window of opportunity. Now, I guess, sort of the question would be like, how much time do we have? And very interestingly, very recently, there is an Australian physicist actually called Graham Turner, who looked back at the projection of the Club of Rome report from 72, who was authored, of course, by everybody knows, the Dennis Meadow, which was entitled The Limit of Growth. And so when you look at this slide, for instance, it's very interesting because basically, this is the projection that was elaborated in 72. So that was like literally 50 years ago, right? And so that Australian physicist, or Graham Turner, he actually looked back at those projections and looked, okay, let's look at what was the projection and what is the real data, how did it correlate? And so the sort of the part a bit blurred on the left, this is historical data. The one which is actually clear and where you can see a bold line and dotted line, this is actually the analysis. And you can see basically that the bold and dotted line, they almost perfectly correlate. So, it wouldn't be too much of a sort of a long shot to actually assume that the future of those projections, so basically between 2000 and 2100, would more or less sort of be what was projecting 50 years ago if nothing is changed. And that was exactly the point of that report, right? So, and yet, as you can see, the arrow basically points when at the point, sort of the time where our economy will start to collapse if we don't do anything. And that's basically around 2030, right? So 10 years. So we're in 2020. We literally have 10 years to avoid the worst, scenario and the worst type of impact. So, 10 years it's a very, very, very short time. And I know I've been married for almost 10 years, and, I'm, as you might have heard from my accent, I'm actually French. I'm also half Argentinian. And, in our culture, wine is quite a predominant thing. And obviously, wine, some very good wine make actually 10 years to make. So this is, you can literally drink something that takes as much time as we have left to, again, avoid the worst, scenario. And sort of, the unique situation where we are at now is that we are the last generation that is actually able to do something about it. So, no pressure, obviously, but just to say that, we need to get that right because nobody else will be able to get it right for us. And, when we look at sort of what do we need to prioritize eventually? And here it's, obviously everybody is, the planetary boundaries report that was produced by John Rockstrom. You can see basically sort of the red areas are those boundaries that have been far exceeded. And the one that is by far exceeded is the biodiversity loss. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago when WWF released their reports on the state of biodiversity, they announced that we already lost 60% of global biodiversity in 40 years. So this is just like an non-precedented, especially at that rate. And so obviously, and I guess sort of the point that I want to make is that because we went far beyond that limit, that boundary, we need to get back into, the planetary boundary. And only for that, we need to regenerate biodiversity. So not only do we need to stop losing, biodiversity, but we need to restore its biodiversity. We need to regenerate the planet. When we look at the ocean, what am I talking about here? I'm talking about, the loss of corals. We already lost 30% of the coral cover in the world. And we are, current projection, they show that in the next 10 to 40 years, we'll lose at least 35%. And, there is very, very high chances that in the next, 50 to 100 years, there won't be any corals anymore in the sea. As everybody knows, how coral is important for, the health of the ocean and its biodiversity, fisheries, etc. Now, another imminent threat is obviously, and this is an anthropogenic threat, is overfishing. Can you imagine? We are currently harvesting 100 million tons of fish every year. So we went far and beyond what's, I guess, even like a few decades ago, we thought would humanly be possible. We used to sort of stand on the beach and look at the ocean and say, like, this is, there is nothing to sort of stop us, and yet we are literally depleting the entire ocean from its life. there is, still a bit left, but not so much left. As a matter of fact, when you look at this picture, I like it because basically it shows you that there is just the tip of the tail that is left for us to eat in some ways, right? There is already 50% of the fishery stock that are already fully exploited, more than 30% that are already overexploited, and this is growing. And that report or that figure is actually a few years old, so I'm pretty sure that we might actually already be far beyond 85%. Now, another enormous change, and it's quite sort of recent that the world is awakening, on what's happening. And here I'm talking about the plastic that is currently dumped in the sea every year. And here I'm talking about 8 million tons of plastics every year. And just so you realize, I guess it's very difficult to visualize 8 million tons, what it looks like. But another sort of, not so fun fact is that by 2050, current scenarios, they show that if we continue on that trend, there will be more plastic in the ocean than there will be fish. I mean, just take time to digest what I just said. And this is just completely insane. And yet we are actually going for it, and we're going fast. We're going fast. Now, maybe something that you might be a bit less aware of. Some of you, maybe other, I'm sure are very, very aware. We've been talking about ocean acidification. Just in a nutshell, what it is, it's basically the ocean, sort of the pH. It's evolve, it decrease in that case, and basically our ocean becomes more acidic. And that means that any living organism with a shell starts either having real complication to actually grow or actually start dissolving, like when you would put something into acid. So that's literally what's happening right now. When you look at the image on the left, this is where we are at, right? So it's still sort of within the planetary boundary. If we go back to that slide, you'll see that we are right at the limits. And just so you realize, sort of the next image, this is what would happen to the ocean if we reach a state of between 400 and 500 ppm. And this is the way sort of that we measure acidity in the ocean. And just so you realize, 66 million years ago, a mass extinction, right, was triggered because the ocean actually reached 450 ppm level. And currently we are at 375, right? And so, as I said, that mass extinction triggered this, that we actually at that time lost 75% of life on Earth. Again, no pressure, because basically we are currently projecting that level of acidity, we might reach it when the world, sort of the global warming, will reach more or less 2 degrees. And sort of the last image on the right is actually, you can see what happened when the ocean becomes more acidic. So like beyond 500 ppm, it's a dead ocean. There is nothing in there that lives, nothing. Just this image, it basically shows you what happened to a shell when we put, into more acidic water after 45 days. It dissolves, it disappears, right? So now, of course, the ocean is full of biodiversity, but there is millions and millions of people who actually depend directly on its biodiversity, on its resources. And in our region in particular, of course, we have like 60 million people who live, by the sea, and directly their livelihoods are directly put at risk, because when you lose life in the ocean, eventually what happens is that their livelihood are put at risk directly, and they might actually start losing not only their livelihood but also sort of their way of feeding themselves, etc., etc. Points. Now, of course, it's also an incredible opportunity, and as we say, there is increasing momentum around the blue economy. And as a matter of fact, there is a good reason why. So right now, if we look at just the state of the ocean economy, it would be, if it was an economy, in itself, it would be the 7th largest economy just between France and Italy. It is really substantial, right? But as I said, right now our ocean are under threats, and we don't have time to lose. We need to do something. So the way that we approached it in IUCN, at least in our region, is that we intend to build, or to move towards this blue future that I just talked about before. And the way that we want to do that is by building resilience through, enhancing healthy and restoring, an healthy ocean, and of course, the coast, because those are obviously intricately linked. So maybe just in a nutshell, you know, we use what we call the blue framework, and basically there are three key pillars. One is the blue nature, another one is the blue people, and the last one is about blue partnerships. And we believe that we need to engage and double down really on those three key pillars if we want to restore the healthy ocean and coast, and if we want to build resilience in the ocean and at seascapes. How do we do that? So basically, you know, the blue nature, the point of the blue nature pillar is that we need to restore, right? As I was saying, we need to regenerate, we need to restore and secure the integrity of those blue critical ecosystem that we have in coastal area and marine areas. We also need to obviously sort of halt, you know, unsustainable practices and develop a regenerative ocean economy. So not only an economy that is sustainable or not, and certainly not, you know, an economy that keeps destroying and sort of depleting our natural capital. We need to reinvent completely our economy and the model that we produce, so that basically, you know, the more we grow, the more we restore and regenerate our planet. And last but not least, we need to dramatically accelerate, right? And upscale our effort. And this is where sort of the blue partnerships comes in. We need to, you know, break the silos. We need to go far beyond the boundaries where, you know, we conservationists, we used to work in and sort of, you know, feel comfortable. No, we need to work with everyone and anyone and come up with those, you know, moonshots or earth shots or ocean shots, whatever we want to call it, to really do, you know, what needs to be done. Now, just to basically sort of illustrate what, you know, what we are doing in our region here under the Blue Planet, for instance. So one of our aim goal in the, you know, in our region, in particular in the Western Indian Ocean region, is to really by 2030, we need to achieve a zero net loss of those critical ecosystems. And here I'm talking about coral reefs, mangrove forests, and seagrass meadows. Why? Because those are vital organs of our ocean. You know, it's like, you know, if you don't have a heart, well, you know what's going to happen. Well, that's exactly what's going to happen to our ocean if those critical ecosystems, you know, we keep losing them. And of course, and that means that we'll have to work through conservation and restoration efforts. Maybe through sort of the blue people pillar, what we want to do, as I said, you know, we want to support the development and accelerate the development of a regenerative ocean-based economy. And by that, we want to sort of create new PPPs, you know, and here I'm actually talking about, you know, new people and planet partnerships. As I say, you know, it's not anymore, we need to go beyond this model where, you know, the human exploit the natural resource and extract and sort of grow on this. No, it needs to be really a give and take on both. And the way that we intend to do that in our region is actually we want to establish a first of its kind an ocean venture studio, which basically will act as a sort of a startup factory for the blue economy, and in particular for this type of partnerships, those two new PPPs. And last but not least, I'm almost there. In terms of blue partnerships, here we absolutely need, you know, to unlock new financing. And so, of course, you know, we need to develop new innovative financing mechanism for coastal and ocean conservation. And here, for instance, in our case, what we're pushing for is, like, we are currently developing what we call the Blue Buyout Fund, which will aim at creating liquidity for venture investors to basically sort of enable them and to invest more, and, you know, to sort of really unlock the capital flow towards those ocean ventures that I just mentioned. And we're also currently looking at sort of adapting the impact bond structure to scale up our efforts here and accelerate conservation and restoration. I'm going to stop here because I think I already went above and beyond my time. So I just wanted to thank you all. And I'm very much looking forward for the discussion and the presentation of the other panelists. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Very, very interesting, especially the options you mentioned towards the end. So I would like to invite Charles Carangua to please share his presentation with us.
Okay. I hope you can hear me all. Just to signal if you can, or I'm mute.
Yes, we hear you well.
Okay, brilliant. Good afternoon, good morning, everyone, and wherever you are. And it's my pleasure really to be on this panel tonight, talking about building resilience and promoting green economy. And I think it helps me to move quite faster because my colleague Thomas already presented quite a number of things. And thank you very much, colleagues from Redlac and Cafe, for really organizing a very successful event. And this is becoming the new normal, having these events online. And I think this was one of the most successful one. And we appreciate that. So I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the green economy, which complement what Thomas talked about blue economy. And I wanted just to start this with trying to remove the myths behind this concept of green economy. There's nothing actually new we are talking about. Especially from conservation point of view, from people who understand investments, we are just looking at a system of economic activities. And when we talk about economic activities, you are bringing into the conversation production, distribution, and consumption. And the only difference from what has been done from decades is that now this particular system we are creating is actually helping to improve the well-being of people, is creating a long-term sustainability, and it's avoiding just exposing future generation to social risk. So that's, in other words, sustainability aspect. So it's really, when we talk about the green economy, don't think it's something that is foreign and another new terminology that we are bringing. But it's actually rethinking investments patterns, rethinking how we do business, rethinking how we invest our resources. So this is actually how we get to sustainable development. And without a green economy, without greening our financial instruments, I can confidently and you can quote me here, that we will hardly actually achieve the word sustainable development we are all envisioning to achieve. So there's a whole Green New Deal which catalyze green growth, and from there then you have green economy, which is a means to achieve sustainable development. And why does this actually even matter? Why now? And I think Thomas mentioned a number of factors. I'm sure you might have already I discussed a number of things in the past few days, but I think there's a number of reasons that we should be even concerned more. There are more threats to humanity and investments than ever before. So Thomas was alluding to 10 years ahead, but actually global warming is a reality, and we are facing a time than ever before when fossil fuels have created a dependency in the human mindset. We are losing more rainforest than ever before. I talked about fire and other things, but also actually this is the time in the history pollution is terrible. And in addition to all of this, of course, there is an increase of population. This all is affecting all the species. So there's a number of reasons that now we should be concerned more about the future and sustainable development we are talking about. And this is just a projection of temperature change. And this adds to a number of other climate change maps you probably have seen. And as you can see, there is no way we can just do the business as usual. There is no way we can keep investing the way we have been investing over the last years. So we needed to change this. And we only have, as my colleague said, this is by 2040. So it's only a couple of years ahead. And some of people in the core, actually, they would probably hardly be turning 40 like me today. Others will be turning even 30. So it's really interesting to talk about this, and especially this particular generation. And as I mentioned, without effective response to this, water quality and quantity, now coming back from blue to terrestrial ecosystem, water quality and quantity would become a problem. And here, I was just reading a report that actually by 2050, most conflicts would be related to water if nothing is done to improve actually water availability. So this is quite alarming. And food security in some African countries, yields from the rain-fed agriculture by end of this year already it is facing a lot of problems. So it may be halved, and it's already 2020, and we are seeing that. Now we are talking about, we are in a period where all of us, we are talking about COVID-19, and definitely control of infectious disease. There will be an increase in population at risk, especially in Africa and some other tropical countries. And this increase will lead to 170 million by 2030 increase in malaria cases. So, and of course, without forgetting the COVID-19 as a fact, which we are all, going through this particular period, and we're talking about 2 billion by 2080. So this is quite alarming. And of course, talking about disasters, there would be more an increased kind of exposure to coastal flooding. Thomas was showing interesting, unfortunately sad pictures there in Mozambique. And this we are talking about a factor of, by a factor of 10. So this is quite really alarming. That's why we need to talk about actually green economy, and I will come to that. So why? Again, this is the only opportunity we have to create a sustainable future. We are talking about a decade of action when, again, we are looking at sustainable development goals here. We have just started implementing the Paris Agreement for the next 10 years. We are looking at other conventions, post-2020 biodiversity framework. We're talking about other climate change conventions. So the time is now. I feel like the next 10 years is really when the green economy needs to take off and actually be turned into action, without what we'll be talking to ourselves. Again, green economy, as I mentioned, it's not something fugitive. It's something we just apply to development sector. So we are not talking about something outside the blue. We are talking about how we direct resources, how we finance development sector. So agriculture is one of them. Remember, agriculture is one of the major driver of biodiversity loss and land use change. So we need to recognize that. Fisheries, my colleague talked about that. Forests, manufacturing, renewable energies, tourism, infrastructure. So all these development sectors, this is where actually green economy needs to happen. So, and we are talking here, and I like the fact that actually Redlac and the Cafe, which is a coalition of conservation funds, put this together. What I like, we are talking about conservation funds, but actually we need to start thinking of conservation outside the protected areas, outside the parks, outside the critical ecosystems. We need to bring this idea of conservation, and this is actually where resources will come from, into development sectors, infrastructure, energy, etc. Again, sorry, I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of opportunities to bring green economy into sectors, and we're talking about greening, actually renewable energy, technology, clean technology, from material to energy efficiency, low carbon cities. We're talking about waste management. So sometimes all of this, we don't look them just as part of opportunities for changing how business is done. And sometimes I'm actually working for a conservation organization. For decades, conservation have been siloed into species and diversity and those kind of critical things, and the red list. And so, but I think it's time to start looking at actually development sectors. And I talked about sustainable cities, and I wanted just to put this graph here. If you look at the increase of population in the urban setting, by 2030, we are talking about 5 billion people in the cities. So people will be moving from rural area to the cities, which doesn't mean that it's good or bad. I don't know. It's going to depend very much on how we invest in sustainable cities. It's going to depend very much on how we manage water resources. It's going to depend very much on how we create space for nature, applying nature-based solutions to the cities. So that's why I actually put this here. I wanted to, as we think about the growth, the changes, the development, the patterns, the green economy needs to happen now within even the sustainable cities framework. So cities are polluted, clouded, and complex to manage, but delivering the smart city will help to improve sustainability and growth in these cities. The other interesting, this is just an interesting picture, just to say, actually, poor urban planning costs lives. We all know that. So we need really to start bringing the nature-based solutions, the natural infrastructure into the making as we talk about the urban development. This is a recent catastrophe in East Africa, and this costed about 200 people lives who just died because of flooding. And as you can see, women and children suffered really seriously most in this particular situation. So I'm talking about green building, and by improving our investments into green building, we are talking about actually saving lives and reducing disasters. And we are talking about sustainable transport. So green economy does not happen just in a vacuum. It happens within everything we are doing every day. And sustainable transport. Look at this chaos here. But the gentleman on a bicycle actually have a green carpet. I like this picture. Yeah, this is actually how we need to think about. How do we choose to invest resources? How our governments choose to invest resources? We can choose the path we take. Either we go for sustainable transport or we just let business as usual to happen. And this will then cost us quite a lot. We are talking about renewable energy, and about 2.3 million jobs in renewable energy sector can be easily created. So this is really an old number, but I think the reason why I brought this here, I wanted to allude to, we have opportunity to make, especially when I look at African continent, but also other regions. I mean, opportunities for renewable energy are enormous. Hydro is a huge opportunity. Solar is huge, but the choice we make defines actually how we invest our resources. Either we go for fossil fuels or we choose renewable energy. So, and projected investment in this particular sector by 2030 is estimated to 630 billion, and this will create actually 20 million jobs. It's amazing. Which other sector actually can create this high number of jobs? And we are talking about water. And so this is just something I want us to reflect on. I talked about water somewhere there. And until we discover water availability and productivity as a factor of economic growth, and now the green economy growth, actually we are still missing something, because water will become scarce until we start reinvesting in catchment management, in water tower protection, etc. So this is something, we have some interesting examples in different countries already, where investments in hydropower just stopped because you can't manage the upstream. And this is where I need to reimagine the investments in water resources. So something that, of course, touches all our lives, that's agriculture. Now, some of the interesting thinking here, I think we are seeing interest in agriculture, etc. But how do we do agriculture is very, very important, and how we reimagine investment in agriculture. There's a number of countries that have made deliberate choices to invest in agriculture, and data are out there from long time ago. They choose the decision, just we will invest in sustainable agriculture. And of course, interesting picture on forest. A fact is that communities, including all of us, we depend on forests. We depend on, our livelihoods depend on non-timber forest products and timber as well. And in Africa, a significant part of the population, Southeast Asia, India, and some other countries, depends very much on forest. So how do we create sustainable forest management, combat desertification, and encourage land restoration to avoid actually loss of our forest? So, and again, having said this, I have also a good news. I think there is always a good news to consider. there's a very high interest in financing green economy. This is just a recent analysis from IFC, and it shows the climate smart investment potential by 2030. And as you can see, if you take China, we are talking about 14 billion, a trillion actually, of US dollars. And if I take, for example, MENA region, or Southeast Asia or Sub-Saharan Africa, so you can see there's quite significant. So we are talking about total of 22,633 billions of investment. So it's amazing. So all these resources are out there by 2030. So in the next 10 years, we're talking about this huge investment, which I call the climate smart. This is in all sectors I mentioned, infrastructure, agriculture. But how do we tap into these resources? How do we influence how this investment is going to be done to turn this green economy? And this is how it's shared just across the region. I call it market segmentation per geographical region. But it's not different from what I presented up there. But if you look at the whole of Asia, actually this 15%, 29, and 34 is Europe and Central Asia. 29 is I think South Asia region, and 15% is East Asia. So you can still see Asia have quite a lot of interest in this particular green economy discussion. And there is again several national and international green economy financing opportunities. I just put a few examples here. So this shows all that we are all thinking about the same. We are actually on the move, but conservation funds, we need really to start looking outside the box and tap into these resources, all this money which is out there, and start bringing into the making. Again, there's other green finance or green economy finance instruments, renewable energy subsidies, I mentioned about this. And of course, different financial institutions will be directing their investment here. There's a lot of opportunities for investment in environmentally friendly energy saving schemes. There's investment in increase of energy efficiency. Energy is always a very huge opportunity for financing, for sustainable investment, but also there's sustainability finance for mobility sector. So this includes transport, and you will see many countries, including countries on my continent, Africa, have a lot of interest in Asia, in Europe, in Latin America, etc. And of course, a lot of opportunity for ecological sustainable water management. I didn't want to put all of these resources out there, but there's a lot of instruments which are out there which can actually create the green economy financing trends. And again, as I close my presentation, I think a few recommendations. I don't take this as I got this, I did a lot of analysis around, and I read a lot of the documents, and a number of things I just wanted to talk about here. Green economy require transformative systemic change. And this needs to happen at public sector level, private sector level, community level, so civil society level. It's a whole transformative systemic change. Systemic change. It's really a word that I want to underline. Governments, our governments, will need to identify efficiency of public spending and make need adjustments. Simply because there's still a lot of money invested in agriculture. There's a lot of money invested in infrastructure. But how do we turn that into green economy patterns? That's very important. Upscaling and acceleration of far-reaching, multi-level, cross-sectoral integration of climate change will be key, because until we talk about this, we see climate change as a threat and help us to change how we invest, we are still talking to ourselves. Scale up implementation of nature-based solutions. And my last here reflection on this is actually how we catalyze private sector finance and investments in the green economy. By the way, private sector have a lot of money. How do we catalyze that to be direct to green economy? And finally, my last slide is here. Do you think, or would the green economy be a new engine to achieve sustainable development? Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Charles. I would like to invite Jillian. You have the floor.
Hello and good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I am really delighted to be part of this conversation for two reasons. First of all, the quality of the entire Congress has been excellent. And so I'm delighted to add a private sector perspective. And I'm particularly delighted because I'm going to be focused on making some contribution that is relevant to the Caribbean and particularly to small island development states in the Caribbean. So my name is Jillian Marcel, and I am the managing partner of a boutique capital advisory practice based in Washington, DC. And my presentation is going to be looking at building resilience, promoting blue and green economy, but from the point of view of, I'm just trying to get the slides to move. Right. So we are active in 3 domains, and we provide financial advisory services. We do a lot of strategic advisory work with ventures, and we also do advocacy on issues of systemic change that my colleague Thomas was just speaking about. But very specifically in the area of blue and green finance, we are active in transactions. And so in the time that I have available, I'm going to be doing 2 things. One is spending a bit of time setting up a conceptual framework for how I think we can actually accelerate progress on financing. And then I'm also going to share from the point of view of someone who is actively mobilizing capital for renewable energy in the Caribbean, representing a very large private equity fund. So I'm going to be speaking from the point of view of someone who is actively involved in transactions. When we think about what is preventing the mobilization of private capital for sustainable development and for economic development, we offer the view that a blended finance approach is required, and not the blended finance approach that is put forward by the conventional agencies, the very large agencies. We've actually come up with a definition that sees blended finance as an investment strategy that deploys financial capital in combination with other forms of capital. And that is so relevant for the conversation that we've been having for these 3 days, because it is clear to me that this is a community that is full of other forms of capital. There's knowledge capital, because you have highly trained, credentialized, experienced conservation professionals who have knowledge expertise that is very different to that of the capital markets professionals who are expected to generate the private capital. And of course, because of where conservation funds and conservation as part of sustainable development has performed, there are also other forms of capital that are not being tapped. And these include political capital, social capital, cultural capital, network capital, and relationship capital. So we take the view that the future actually involves deploying these forms of capital in combination. And it is the combination of those various forms of capital that can then activate the natural assets to produce beneficial services. And so that's the starting point of our analysis. We further go on to suggest that there are 3 elements or 3 components that appear to be getting in the way of the sustainable development challenge. And of course, we know that this does not only relate to conservation finance, because those of you who are following the sustainable development conversation and dialogue knows that we went through the ritual a few weeks ago of commemorating the fact that there is a 2.5 trillion with a T gap in the financing of the SDGs, with the UN system then declaring that it is unlikely that the SDGs, because of the COVID pandemic, will then be reached by, I think it was until 2092 or something along those lines. So we've put out a framework that suggests that there are three components, namely bottlenecks. And we believe that among the sort of categories of bottlenecks, structural bottlenecks are particularly important. Processual bottlenecks are also very key, and cognitive bottlenecks. And of the cognitive bottlenecks, blind spots are perhaps where collectively and individually in our various verticals and various communities of practice, we need to be exploring not only what are the blind spots of your adversaries or your counterparts, but what are the blind spots within your own communities? What are some of the mental models existing within conservation finance communities that may preclude setting up genuine partnerships? Because I can assure you that on the finance side, there are huge blind spots operating in the other way, in the other direction. And I spent a lot of my time looking at and advocating for, and in a sense, healing many of the blind spots that exist within finance and investment, particularly within the North Atlantic, where finance and investment is one of the most racially homogeneous, unexposed to gender equality and diversity, and quite frankly, unaccountable sectors of what we do as a human family. So there are blind spots, the status quo blind spot, the herd effect, the authority bias, who is perceived to have value, the ways in which the indigenous communities, and this may be true for the conservationists as well, are not considered to have knowledge and value that can actually help shape what we do. I can assure you that standing up for those kinds of values and those what are seen to be radical mental models is going to be very important if we work our way out of a situation in which we have needs, we have demands, we have requirements, and yet as a human family, the best that we can do is to keep every year coming back with a mapping exercise that states how far we are away from our objective. I think we can do better. And Resilience Capital Ventures, the contribution that we are making is through this conceptual framework and our work in transactional finance. And so going a bit further into the blended finance is sort of the financial capital as well as other forms of capital. The conventional view of blended finance is that you have public finance, so governments borrowing, so that's debt capital, and it might be some grants. And then you're crowding in or you're mobilizing financial flows into a pool of funds, saying very little about the timing, the sequencing, the structuring that would make that possible. And certainly what we have learned in the Caribbean, certainly with the work that I have done in development many years previously, and now from a transactional point of view, the crowding in or the requests, the rituals of going through, suggesting that donors do more is not enough. And so we really need, within our enabling environments and within the work that we do on the policy environment, as well as on the behavioral processes that underlie how we go about doing our business of development, to take a look at some of these other forms of capital. Let me also say that, quite frankly, I don't think that the labeling and the rubrics of green and blue and orange actually help. I think that we are actually still in the business of trying to work our way through as a human family for development. And I saw in one of the questions asked about where does growth fit in? And I think in this community, having a sensitive, thoughtful approach to development that does not necessarily mean perpetual growth or growth that is not just is taken for granted. A few points on the specifics of the Caribbean and what are some of the things that have given me cause for optimism, and some of the things that I hope that Resilience Capital Ventures will be involved in supporting. As many of you in this community will know, similar to other parts of the world, the small island development states in the Caribbean also have national conservation funds. And what is also true is that those conservation funds have actually grouped together to work as a collaboration of, I think it's 8 conservation funds that are working together in many different ways, but including, and importantly, on their capital raising or their fundraising effort. Why that is particularly important is because in the Caribbean, the size of transactions are typically quite small. They are smaller than would attract private capital actors on their own. And so if you then increase the friction and the transaction cost by having to do this for each individual island nation, it makes it even more unlikely that you would be attracting capital in. And so I am hoping that we would be able to support the efforts of this group of national conservation funds. And there are some things that I think we can learn. And I'm very, very excited that the next speaker is from SECAT, because I think that there are some things that we can learn from the Seychelles model. And there's 3 specific points that I want to make about the Seychelles model that from a private sector point of view. One is that although the debt swap was a relatively small transaction, $15 million is not a large transaction, it involved a large number of players. And it involved a large number of players because it was the first. And so even though the Caribbean can no longer be the first, they might be the second. And so there is a great opportunity to learn, to experiment, and to therefore take forward this agenda by doing. That's the first point. The second point is that what often my friends, my colleagues, dear friends and colleagues, do not realize is that if you are dealing with the private sector, you have to be comfortable with selling. And often that is not well understood. And so the placement agent is a fancy name for the person, the institution that sold this deal into international capital markets. And so people like myself, who worked at JP Morgan, initiated coverage for the first listed telecoms company in sub-Saharan Africa, understand that selling, persuading, and being completely clear that that is part of your mission, it is not going to happen passively. And therefore, when we are talking about what are the next steps, many people in this Congress have used the passive voice to describe the next steps with regard to the private sector. The passive voice is not going to work. There is going to have to be effort undertaken to present this as something that a private sector actor takes on as a good business opportunity, whether for the first transaction or the many others that are to come, and then puts their effort into selling the deal into international markets. The final point that I want to make about the Seychelles model is that it also included the development finance actors providing catalytic capital, and of course, the Nature Conservancy. And that is so important precisely because that kind of catalytic capital is not happening in the Caribbean. The DFIs that are active in the Caribbean are doing projects in Chile, Mexico, and Brazil, and claiming that they are active in LAC. And so I'm using my 8 minutes to make a request that the island states of the Caribbean are given their fair share of development expertise and catalytic capital, because without it, we will not get out of the trap. My final slide speaks to a call to action. In terms of bottlenecks, what we need to do is to strengthen the national, regional, and global efforts to create linkages. That's where we will get the subject area specialists actually speaking to finance professionals and joint teams. Of course, we need to improve the technical design because there's a lot to learn from the Seychelles model and other models. There are many other funds and many of the designs. I've learned a lot in the last 2 days about the designs that are being experimented with, and that should be done in the Caribbean. I've already spoken to the need to actually do placement and marketing. It's not going to fall like manna from heaven. It needs to be marketed and sold. In terms of the blind spots, and this is real, this is very, very real, and I don't think that the Caribbean is unique. Governments think about development in economic terms. They have come around to also including social sectors in how they view their responsibilities and so on, the notion of a developmental state. We're not really there in terms of solving the challenge, which is a cognitive one and a policy one, that there is no trade-off between that biodiversity, conservation, preservation of natural habitats, and economic well-being. We do not yet have policy discussions about the ways in which those factors can be integrated to actually produce and advance economic well-being. And so we need to take that into account, and I think academic institutions and think tanks would be particularly important, as well as the international development community. We need to equip, particularly at what in progressive circles are called the community level, with advocacy and policy analysis skills. We should not be speaking for communities. We should be enabling the original and authentic voices of those communities to become better advocates, whatever that will take. And I think in older sectors of participatory development, we've made lots of strides, and I would certainly like to see this in the conservation world. On the blended finance aspects of things, this is where we get into actually the doing. We need to design, we need to test, we need to deploy, we need to review, we need to fine tune, and we need to scale. And so my final word is that for the Caribbean since, Resilience Capital Ventures certainly makes itself available to develop the conceptual frameworks, to apply them, and to do the practical steps that are required to move from knowing that something is what we should do to actually doing it. And so I want to again thank the organizers for the opportunity to join this conversation and to make this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gillian. I would like to invite Angelique, our last speaker for this panel, to please share your presentation.
Thank you very much. I will, yep, I hope you can all see that okay. So it's evening on this side of the world, but greetings from the Seychelles. My name is Angelique Pupono, as already introduced, and I will be focusing and deep diving into what has already been briefly described, and one known as the Seychelles model, where the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust is very much a PPP, and one that is that has the objective of looking at ocean health and ocean protection at its core for sustainable development, for economic and people and prosperity. So a little bit more about SECAT. So the Seychelles Conservation and Climate Adaptation Trust, which you will hear me refer to as SECAT from now on, was actually created to facilitate a very specific transaction. And this was a blended finance transaction. It was the first debt for nature swap for the purposes of ocean conservation. So the amount was a $21.6 million debt restructure that involved the buyback of debt from sovereign external creditors, and finances were mobilized by a huge number of donors, but in particular led by the Nature Conservancy. And through the mobilization of finances, they were able to enable the government of Seychelles to buy back its debt, and in turn have certain benefits. But what I want to focus on is not only was it a financial mechanism, it also involved clear sustainability targets. And this involved the condition of protecting 30% of our exclusive economic zone. And this would be further supported by a marine spatial planning process that would enable the country on the ground with all its actors and stakeholders to really work together in a community-driven process and identify where we would have these marine protected areas. So very much a blended finance mechanism with a clear sustainability target. It was not a large amount of money. It was a $21.6 million deal, but there are clear benefits that that So with certain internal revenue controls and laws in certain countries, the SECAT was created specifically to facilitate this debt for nature swap by enabling the movement of funds from the Nature Conservancy to the government of Seychelles to enable them to buy back their debt. But of course, since then, we are the ones who ensure that commitments are met. We repay the impact investors. We also ensure that the commitment to channeling funds to ocean conservation and climate adaptation is undertaken through a Blue Grants Fund, which we manage, as well as capitalizing an endowment fund. Again, here very much focused on the idea of future generations and having a long-lasting legacy beyond just the time frame of the deal for the debt for nature swap. But since our creation, we've been a value addition to the blue economy landscape in Seychelles. We are now this not-for-profit, non-governmental, independent organization that is able to provide a service. So a few years later, so 3 years later to be exact, when the government of Seychelles issued the first sovereign blue bond, the Seychelles' first sovereign blue bond, they were looking for administrators or managers of these funds, and SECAT, being well positioned, was an attractive proposition for donors in particular and the private community, as again, independent, transparent organization who was then tasked with managing $3 million of the blue bond proceeds. We have been established by an act of parliament, and we have our own board of directors and so on and so forth. I know there are time constraints, so I won't go further into our actual structure. So this diagram, and I would need way more time to explain it fully, but it is depicting to you with the movement of the arrows, the debt for nature swap. Right now, you should see the debt purchase without creditors at the Paris Club. The funds are then bought at a discount, which is why you see the difference between the purchase amount and the debt transfer. You've got the repayment. You've got the Blue Grants Fund there, the Blue Endowment. And then we introduce a whole new mechanism with the Sovereign Blue Bond. So we would definitely need more time to be able to fully appreciate all the movement of funds. But I'll leave this slide here only to show that, one, it depicts the debt for nature swap, but also the sovereign blue bond. And Jillian before me spoke about how many actors came together, you know, and here you can see with the blue bond, for example, it was issued by the government of Seychelles, but we found that there were certain mechanisms to de-risk the transaction by including the GEF as well as the World Bank with a partial guarantee. So again, really showing the need for various actors in these blended finance deals. So what were the benefits to the government? Here you saw, and this is in particular to the debt for nature swap, there was a redirection of external debt service. And the great thing about the repayment of the loan once it was bought back from the external creditors at the Paris Club is that 2/3 of the debt now can be paid in local currency. So really securing your foreign exchange reserves, especially now during hard times when there's limited income for a small island developing state dependent on tourism. But in addition to that, because of the structure of SECAT, government are also able to apply for funding from SECAT through the Blue Grants Fund. Of course, all competitive and a transparent process. So what else did Seychelles get out of this debt for nature swap? So as of 2020, on March 26th, we actually met the milestone that was required of the debt for nature swap. We now have more than 410,000 square kilometers of new marine protected areas in the Seychelles, half of which are actually no-take zones. And that was really part of the debt for nature swap, fulfilling that condition. That was part of the deal. We also now have a marine spatial planning policy, which has been adopted by Cabinet last week, I believe. And we are working together with a World Bank funded project with complementary funds to support better fisheries management. As mentioned, we have our Blue Grants Fund, and here we have 8.6 million, again, just from the debt for nature swap, 8.6 million US dollars that will be spent over 20 years for marine and climate adaptation work. And of course, the endowment. So you've seen our two mechanisms. One is the debt for nature swap, one is the blue bond. What are the results of these blue innovative financing mechanisms that the Seychelles has done? On one hand, we have 12 million US dollars that's available as loans at 4% interest rate, much better than commercial. But that, of course, is administered by the Development Bank of Seychelles, in fact, another PPP. And for SECAT, we annually disperse 700,000 US dollars. And this is through the debt for nature swap providing us with 200,000 and the blue bond 500,000, which in total gives us the 700,000 US dollars that is disbursed as grants. You will see as the PowerPoint loads, our strategic objectives are really linked to marine conservation and climate adaptation. And of course, our funds are definitely used to channel towards supporting the Marine Spatial Plan and supporting Seychelles in that 30% marine protection commitment. We so far are funding 34 projects. It's been 3 years since managing the Blue Grants Fund. We're funding 34 projects worth over 1.2 million US dollars. We've just provided you a few examples from doing a roadmap on blue carbon opportunities in Seychelles to mapping coral population connectivity across the currents of the Western Indian Ocean, river mapping, citizens' guides on climate change. And I will end there, but before I do, I see I do have a few seconds left. One of the most innovative projects that the Seychelles is embarking on, and one that SECAT is facilitating, is a project to map all the seagrass meadows. And we've heard how critical they are already from previous speakers, but we will be mapping all the seagrass meadows of the Seychelles EEZ, and within that be able to assign a blue carbon value, i.e. how much carbon is being absorbed and stored by our seagrass meadows, and we will be including that within our nationally determined contributions as well as subsequent climate communications to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. We are keen to explore how to see whether it's possible to generate revenue from these blue carbon habitats and resources. But again, work in progress. I'll end it there. I know we have time constraints. Thank you. You're on mute, Maria.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your amazing presentation. I am sorry to say we are out of time. We've gone beyond a few minutes, but it has been fascinating to hear from our four panelists. I think the wide presentation, the wide panorama we have now from understanding what blue economy and green economy is and what examples, down-to-earth examples that are being applied are, and to hearing from the investor's point of view and all those great pointers and recommendations that Gillian provided, to actually seeing an example on the ground from SECAT, I think has been very, very inspiring and eye-opening. And I am sure we all have many questions. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I believe maybe these presentations will be shared. I sure hope so. So I want to thank the panelists once again. I want to thank all of you that have been listening to this great panel. And before signing off, I just want to remind the REDLAC members that we have an assembly in about a little over an hour. So to please connect for that meeting. So thank you very much. It has been great. Congratulations to all.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Say you're on mute.
Thank you, Maria
Good day.
Jose, and thank you to all our speakers from this session. This was very insightful and very interesting for us to learn more about these new mechanisms. I would like now to give the floor to Karen Price and Zdenka Piskulic. They will be talking about some closing remarks for our Congress, given that this is our last session. So Karen, let's see.
Karen?
I'm here.
Hi, Karen.
Hello.
Okay. You can.
I've got audio, but I
whether
don't
you're
have video,
close.
so we can
Sorry?
do audio now.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Okay, so I think the host needs to put the video on. It has stopped. I can't switch it on, but anyway. Wow, I think this has been really an amazing 3 day. Oh, there we go. I think this has been an amazing 3 days and really talks to what REDLAC and CAFE are all about, which is about the sharing of experiences, best practices, I mean, even challenges along the way, which we all have lessons from. And it has been amazing to hear from the different speakers that have contributed in great depth and with such richness, valuable information that pertains to biodiversity conservation and nature and the planet and people, and how that ties into sustainable development. I like scribbling notes, so I will just try to pick up on a few key things that have come across throughout the day. I think on the first day, the whole issue about CTFs being intergenerational. And we have heard that again today from Thomas, who spoke about this 10-year gap that we have in terms of making a difference. And we are the last generation to be able to do that. And I can see the camaraderie and the expertise and the knowledge that is available not only within this network, but outside of the network to be able to do that. We have new biodiversity goals that have been that have emerged based on sound research and science, and that makes the case for investment in biodiversity and economic growth. Also to congratulate REDLAC on the launch of FINMA, and we look forward to hearing more about that as you begin to implement your program. We've had wonderful examples, exceptional cases demonstrating how CTFs have responded to the pandemic, both in Africa and Latin America, and this has been really exceptional and very, very interesting to learn about how they have embraced the situation. Also, to congratulate CFA on the launch of their practice standards, and we look forward to the launch of the 10-year review when that has been completed. Some other buzzwords, I think this is really a call to action. We need to move from being passive to active. We need to be convening our alliances and also looking at how we can transform and create systemic change. I think that was also highlighted by our last speakers. We have lots of opportunities in the blue and green economy. And I think the key 4 words that stick with me from Paquita are that CTFs are essential institutions, and we remain essential institutions going into the future. Finally, I would just like to give a quick thanks to the speakers, the panelists, the moderators, the translators, Island Innovation, and the whole technical support team that have been working in the background to make this virtual Congress happen. To the CAFE and REDLAC secretariats, the members of CAFE, the participants that logged in and registered to participate in this event, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being part of this journey with us. Before I conclude, I think the mention has been that we need to embrace change that is before us and continue to evolve and learn and share. And in light of that, I would also like to confirm that CAFE has agreed to join a pledge for biodiversity conservation coming from the Conservation Trust Funds. And this comes from the political leaders' decision that has been made at the United Nations Summit in terms of committing to enhanced aspiration for nature, climate, and people, and also how to scale up given the scale of the crisis at hand. And CAFE has commends the political leaders for taking action, and we also urge the leaders at that level to develop finance plans to meet the very ambitious goals that have been put before us. Finally, I'd just like to say that I think I did begin with the words that if we want to walk fast, we walk alone, but if we want to walk far, we walk together. And this has been really a journey that has brought us together, and I know that we will continue walking on this journey into the future, and we look forward to organizing similar events of this nature in future. So on behalf of CAFE, thank you so much for being part of the last 3 days, and we wish you all the best and keep safe in the days to come. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Karen. And wow, this really has been a journey. And I believe that these past 3 days have been a journey of learning in itself. Like Karen, I have also been taking notes throughout this session and looking at buzzwords and keywords that have been shared. And it's interesting to see how our Congress moved from a first day in which we focused principally on the economic and biodiversity crisis at hand and the need to tackle this economic and biodiversity crisis together and not separately, and the need to make conservation finance an integral part of economic development. We then moved to understanding the role that conservation trust funds can play in actually making this happen, in supporting economic transformation, in linking planetary health with the health of society, in advocating for increased funding, and in focusing on durability and serving as a stable alternative. However, we also learned that in order to do this, conservation trust funds need to prove and continue to prove that they are effective in the work that they do. And therefore, I applaud the Conservation Finance Alliance and all of the members who have participated in developing even higher practice standards, new practice standards, to ensure that as conservation trust funds, we are meeting the best standards possible in the work that we do. It is a guarantee of the kind of quality of the work that conservation trust funds do. And also, we saw that there is a task force working in the development of environmental and social safeguards to ensure that as conservation trust funds, we continue to move forward, not only with the highest standards, but respecting, understanding risk, respecting all of the elements, gender, community participation, everything that is necessary to ensure that we are evolving in the right way. Also, we then moved on to learning about the need to innovate and to evolve. As Karen just mentioned, conservation trust funds must be in constant evolution, just as the world is constantly evolving. We learned about how we can work together in new areas. The 10-year Conservation Trust Fund review was very clear in the need to focus on new areas where conservation trust funds didn't work 20 years ago, such as marine conservation. And we launched FINMAR, the Marine Conservation Finance Alliance, as a potential solution to share new ideas on how to develop marine conservation finance. We talked about how to continue to connect efforts. There are things that connect us. Biodiversity connects us, and we launched Conserva Aves as a new possibility to work together in bringing together migratory bird species. We also learned that we must be at the forefront to respond to the crisis that we are currently living. We saw examples from Biofund. We saw examples from FIAES in El Salvador, examples of how conservation trust funds have stepped up to the challenge of the COVID crisis and have become important partners to the work that governments are doing in order to face this crisis. And then we also learned about the importance of engaging new sectors. With a huge financial gap for biodiversity conservation of over $700 billion per year, trillion dollars per year, I think is the number. How do we actually fill that gap? And so we learned about examples of engaging with private sector and developing new tools. We learned examples from Fondo Acción. We just heard wonderful examples about developing green and blue economy tools to make this happen. And then we also learned today about what we have done and the impact that we have had as conservation trust funds over the past 10 years. And wow, has it really been an impact? And it shows that we are also evolving as conservation trust funds into areas where we weren't working originally. Policy, more local capacity, and a greater emphasis, as always should be, in livelihoods. I also wrote down a lot of the buzzwords that people mentioned: collective thinking, building, convening, aggregating, innovating, sharing. All this is what we try to do through our networks, through CAFE and through REDLAC. As Karen mentioned, we have also now we are about to launch a new pledge, a Conservation Trust Fund pledge for governments and leaders, urging for finance plans to meet the new global goals, urging to emphasize climate finance funds to also fund nature-based solutions, and urging multilaterals to get their money out to the field in the most efficient and effective way possible. I would also like to mention some facts about this Congress, which I think are really interesting. We had 92 countries represented, and these are facts we can also now check our statistics from these past 3 days. And so we had 92 countries represented. That is a big amount of people who are interested in this. This is not only South-South cooperation. This is a global cooperation that is happening. We had over 800 attendees to our sessions out of the 1,012 people who registered. So this means that we have gone beyond the community of Conservation Trust Fund to interest so many others from sectors who believe that we as Conservation Trust Funds have a big impact to give to the world. And the videos are all now available on Facebook Live. They've had over 5,000 views since we posted them as they have been happening. Finally, I would like to conclude by saying a phrase also that says, coming together is a beginning. Staying together is progress. Working together is success. I think what we have been able to prove is that we not only come together once a year, we stay together through our networks, through our friends, through the capacity that we have to work with each other, and we work together. And if we do that, we will achieve success. And to me, success is our impact that we can have in improving planetary health. So thank you to everyone who has participated. I would like to thank all of our sponsors, FEFEM, GIZ, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, Island Innovation, FONAFIFO, and Costa Rica por Siempre for the work that they put in putting this Congress together. This has been all so new to us. There were some glitches in the process, but I think in general, we were able to demonstrate that we can get 92 countries together in a meeting and make it happen. And finally, I would like to send a huge thank you to Maria Luisa Hernandez and to Cristina Bruno, who have been behind the scene, waking up every day at 4:30 a.m. to make sure that we can connect the world through this Congress. We have innovated and we have demonstrated that a virtual Congress is possible. Thank you, everyone, and we look forward to seeing you, hopefully in person, dancing and having a good time next year here in Costa Rica for our virtual Congress, and in Africa, I believe it's in Mozambique, I hope so, next year. Thank you, Karen, for being such a great partner. I think REDLAC and CAFE have shown that we can really change the world. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.